I'm Dave Kaiser from Northwest Community Television. Thank you for joining us for this special presentation. Joining us in the studio is Congressman Erik Paulsen. He represents the 3rd District here in the state of Minnesota. And those cities in our area are Brooklyn Park, Osseo, Maple Grove, and also Plymouth. Congressman Paulsen, welcome to the program.
Oh,
Thanks
it's great
for joining
to be here.
us today.
Thank you.
He is here in the state of Minnesota as we tape this in mid-February on what is a regular time for you to head out to your own district. Tell us a little bit about why you're here and what your mission is while you're here.
Well, of course, I'm in Washington nearly every week, but periodically, once every 6 weeks, we get what's called a district work period. And so for me, I just make sure I'm on a listening tour. So I'm visiting small businesses, I'm visiting schools, visiting the food shelf locally here in Brooklyn Park today, which is just a chance to get hands-on stories and anecdotes about how we can more effectively represent all of my constituents.
When you are here, how does your schedule get set and how full is it? I can imagine you're going from sun up to sundown.
Yeah, the schedule is full because there is no shortage of requests of people that either want to meet with some advice or thoughts or maybe a complaint. But there's plenty of companies to visit, tour, schools. I've been to 180 some schools now throughout the district, which is a great opportunity to visit with teachers and be in the classroom. And so it is sun up to sundown, and it's on Saturday also. So yeah, I have to make sure I carve out some special time with my family or it'll get eaten up quick.
How many opportunities like this are there for you during a year?
Well, we'll have a break around the 4th of July, around Memorial Day, and the Easter time frame. So kind of around those holidays, typically we'll get a week.
Right.
And so other than that, it's pretty much go, go, go when I have to commute to Washington.
All right. Well, he has been busy talking about issues, and let's get right to a few of them. What we thought we would do for the viewers' benefit here in the Northwest area is talk a little bit about different topics that might be coming from different levels, whether it be state, whether it be local. I know you have some passions yourself.
Yep.
But let's talk about the local constituents first. What are some of the issues that you're seeing? And one that we wanted to get more information on was charitable giving. You are spending some time related to this issue. Where are we now with that, and why is this an issue that you're particularly looking at?
Yeah, so this is something I think, and Minnesotans are familiar with charitable giving because it's part of our culture. We help others, and I just had a chance to visit SEEP in the local food shelf and the services that are provided to the entire different community from a wide spectrum. But the reason I went there was to see from the food shelf perspective is to get a really full understanding of how you're serving the community from the SEEP program, but also share the story about how in Washington we just passed legislation to incentivize more giving for more food shelf giving. And that is basically because the tax code, year in and year out, it has expired. And there are provisions that have incentivized companies, grocery stores or C.H. Robinson or other companies to donate their excess food, and they can get a deduction. But those provisions have expired year after year, and so there's no certainty or permanency in the tax code. But just a week ago, we passed with strong bipartisan support to expand the food deduction, to make it permanent, to making sure that we're signaling to all these charities and organizations that give the charities that this should be a part of their annual planned giving. And so that's good news to help charities.
Very good. Let's talk a little bit about how it benefits. You mentioned it benefits from a business aspect, so businesses can benefit from this. How about individually as well? Are there benefits on both sides of that fence?
Well, individuals can still give on their own, and that part of the tax code did not change, but probably the biggest benefit comes from those who are recipients from the charities themselves. And so those that get a chance to go into the food shelf, actually literally shop, push a cart through SEEP, and then select their food. And they might not have that same opportunity with such an abundance of different food options were it not for those incentives in the tax code, because a lot of companies might simply think, it's just easier for me to throw this produce away. And you're better to have, that little incentive for them to give. It's a good thing.
How do you get involved in an issue like this? Is it people like the staff at SEEP and others in the community that say, Congressman Paulsen, let's talk to you for a minute. We need you to help us on this. Tell us about how that happened in this particular issue.
Yeah. Actually, what happened was because this provision in the tax code has been expiring year after year, there are a lot of charitable organizations that said, hey, if we made this permanent, it would really help us for our planning purposes, for how we're growing and where we can have some stability. And there are some other charitable provisions, and one that I sponsored to make the tax code simpler for private foundations. Private foundations are in Minnesota. They give to a lot of different charities to people in need. But they have a very complex tax code that they have to follow. In fact, it's gotten so complex that it has even discouraged giving in times when there might be tough economic times or a natural disaster. So we've heard loud and clear from the private foundation community, hey, if we had a simpler tax code, it would give us a lot more confidence. We wouldn't have to spend so much money on attorneys and accountants. And so that was one of the provisions also that was a part of this charitable package, and I authored that. And so, again, strong bipartisan support. It's one of those areas where we're trying to show that Congress, we can work together, we can get some things done, and it can really help people.
Question on this topic then, and probably on the others we'll cover as well, is if people want more information to find how it would impact their business or them locally, where would they look? To your site, what would be resources that people would go, okay, this is what the new act means?
Yeah, actually, absolutely. People can contact my office directly off the website at paulsen.house.gov.
Sure.
They can, there's information on the site, but more importantly, they can actually get a contact phone number and actually get real specifics if they want from my legislative staff or my local staff here in Minnesota.
Very good. So that's one of the local issues that the Congressman has been working on. Now a personal issue that you've been dealing with for some time, and if you go to the website you'll see lots of press releases and information that has come out, and that's combating sex trafficking. Tell us a little bit about the personal tie first and why this is something you have felt is important to spend some time with.
And this is one of those issues when you talk about human trafficking or sex trafficking, and a lot of people think, this doesn't happen in the United States. This happens only in faraway countries. And my ears kind of perked up to this a few years ago when I spent some time with local law enforcement in Bloomington, and they said, this is actually a big problem here in Minnesota with our hospitality industry, and we've got 12 and 13 and 14-year-old girls and young children that are getting recruited into this young sex trafficking operation. And it's like, wow, that's a shock. And I've gone on some sting operations, and then I've learned that how prevalent this actually is. Spoken with some victims. One was from Brooklyn Park, actually, and she shared her story. And once you hear these stories, it just captivates your heart, and you say, this is more about saving lives, bringing these young girls out of the shadows. And so there are some things that we can do, and we have done, and taken action. And I've taken a personal interest in passing legislation, working with Senator Klobuchar, by the way, here in Minnesota, to offer what are called safe harbor laws. And what that means is essentially, if there's a young girl who's been caught up in sex trafficking or human trafficking, they've always been fearful of being prosecuted for prostitution or alcohol or drugs. We should give those victims, and that's what they are, victims, safe harbor. Don't criminalize their behavior. Give them services. Give them treatment for all the services they may need, medical, legal, otherwise. They'll be more incentivized to turn in the bad guys, and it's working. Minnesota is one of only a little over a dozen states that have these safe harbor laws. But at the federal level, we just passed legislation to incentivize all states to do this, what is I would call a best practice. And there are other things too, cracking down on the traffickers themselves, providing more beds for victims, as well as cracking down on these websites that have been profiteering for soliciting this type of behavior. And so, again, strong bipartisan support, which is really critical, again, to get things done.
And is that the way a lot of the issues that turn into personal issues for you come from, is from meeting with local people and you start to get personal stories? And I would guess you think as a congressman there's so much out there that you hear, but those personal stories from your district might be the ones that hit home. Is that right?
I think the reality is that folks out there need to understand is that not like I've got all these great ideas for implementing a new law or an idea for a new bill. I actually get them from real stories and people that are in my district. And so those experiences, I hear about them, and then we follow up on them, and it said, hey, there could be a solution here where we could actually help. And so that's certainly what we heard on the charitable side as well as on the human trafficking side. And Minnesota, I think, has been leading the way on combating human trafficking, and it's going to spill over and really help us federally get other states to follow our lead.
What work still needs to be done? I would guess with any topic, there's still things that need to be done. What's the next step in the human trafficking area?
Yeah, well, nearly a dozen bills, actually exactly a dozen, 12 different bills passed in the House early this year, which is really unprecedented. All passed the House, bipartisan support, some of them unanimously. For instance, the safe harbor law that I have that passed pretty much, I think maybe one opposition. It really moved through quickly, which is really good. The Senate needs to take those up, but more importantly, we need to continue to make sure we've got the advocates in our community sharing those stories. How can we improve on them? How can we offer new solutions? And then the president will be able to sign, I think, many of these provisions into law in the near future.
You were just at SEEP, and I want to connect this to, are there local organizations that focus on this? I know obviously from the charitable giving and the food for those in need, there are organizations that take that as kind of their banner to march on. In human trafficking area, is there someone locally that really takes this on and is pushing the issue ahead?
Yeah, well, first of all, there are some great organizations in Minnesota that have led the way. Breaking Free is one, and they're headquartered in St. Paul. But as I mentioned earlier, there are organizations throughout the 3rd District, the district I represent, and Cornerstone is one of those. Cornerstone has a presence at the SEEP location where they do counseling for domestic violence, and they've broadened their assistance now to help a lot of these young victims of trafficking as well. So that's a great example of someone that is in the community right here and is helping so many other people.
So again, possibly another website to look at if you want more information about what has been done and what might be done in the future. So we've talked a little bit about local constituents and some of the issues you've been working on from your own passions. Now let's move to the state level, and one that is close to home in our area is the medical device tax. Give us a little information, a little background about this, and about how important it is to your area, 3rd Congressional District.
Yeah, you know, when the new health care law passed, you know, there have been a lot of problems with it, but one of the provisions that I've been most concerned about and really have been championing is trying to repeal this new new tax on medical device companies. And you know, Minnesota, we stand out because we have 400 medical device companies, 35,000 jobs in the state. It is part of our innovation. It's part of our unique culture of who we are, inventing things, helping patients, improving and saving lives. But this tax has been costing a lot of jobs, both in Minnesota and around the country. And it's hurting innovation because you're having fewer companies start up. Like 80% of the companies in the med tech sector are small businesses. They've got less than 50 employees. That's part of the supply chain and the feeder system that a Medtronic or a Boston Scientific or a St. Jude uses. And we want that. That's part of the whole lifeblood of the industry. And so the tax is costing us jobs. It's hurting innovation. And ultimately, it's hurting patients. And so I'm leading the effort to repeal the tax. We've got 273 co-authors in the House, again, broad bipartisan support. I think we're going to move it through, get it across the finish line this year in both the House and the Senate.
What are the obstacles? Obviously, it sounds like there's lots of support, but there's obviously the other side. What is happening on the other side? What potentially could be in the way?
The obstacle in the past has always been the proponents of the president's new health care law that say, hey, you know, we just don't want to change it. We want to give it more time just to do what it's supposed to do. And I just have, you know, from the outset have said this is a very wrong-headed approach. We shouldn't be having this type of a tax. I should mention it's not a tax on your profits. It is a tax on your sales. So it's very unique, and it's an excise tax that just like alcohol or tobacco gets paid. So now you have alcohol, tobacco, and medical devices. And so when you pay a tax on your sales, you're going to have essentially a lot of these startup companies, they're not profitable for 8-10 years, and so it makes it much more difficult. So the obstacles have been, though, that from the proponents of the new health care law says we don't want to change anything. But I think the reality has been now that folks have seen how detrimental it has been to this industry. We're losing our edge in America on this industry if we don't fix it. We've gotten more support.
What is the time frame? If all goes as you would like to see it happen, what is the time frame where something could change?
You know, hopefully this will be acted upon within the next month or so. You know, I always felt that within the first 3 or 4 months of the new congressional session, there's new leadership in the Senate, that this issue would get taken up. And again, on a bipartisan basis. But the old Senate leader really did not have any interest in addressing this issue. He didn't want to take it up. But with new leadership, I think now they're going to vote on it. And if you have a vote, it will pass. That's the good news.
We'll talk about that new leadership in just a second, a little bit more about how that is maybe changing the face of what's happening in national politics. Related to the medical device tax again, looking at our area here, we have so many large companies that deal with this. You mentioned some of the startups that are ones that maybe are not starting because of this, but how about the ones that are existing? Medtronic, Boston Scientific, SciMed. Have they been knocking at your door, and is this something that they have people talking to you on a regular basis? And if so, what do they say?
Yeah, they have brought it up, and it's because they invest a lot of money in research and development, but because of this tax, they have to budget for it, and so they are investing less in research and development. And so, again, this is part of the whole lifeblood of the entire industry, and so they've been concerned about it, but more importantly, they're not concerned about it for themselves. They're more concerned about the whole supply chain of starting something in the backyard or in the garage that a new idea or company might have, that a Medtronic or Boston Scientific might eventually acquire or partner with or have some synopsis for new devices, right? And so that's part of what innovation is about. It's part of our DNA. And I just want to make sure that we're enhancing that and growing it and keeping it right here in Minnesota, not losing those jobs overseas.
All right, so as you can see, the Congressman's plate is full with all of those issues. Let's move ahead to the next level. On a national level, potential trade deals are a topic we want to touch on for a few minutes here. And obviously this is close to home for you, being involved in the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Trade and co-chair of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnerships Caucus. First, give us a little background of those two groups. What do all those acronyms mean? What do all those words mean as far as your involvement there?
Yeah, well, essentially I'm leading the effort as a co-chair of the caucus to promote better and stronger relationships with Europe and a new trade deal with Europe. And it's got a fancy name of TTIP, which is TTIP, but essentially means we should have a trade deal with Europe. And a lot of folks think, well, we're already friends with Europe, which is true, and tariffs are already relatively low. But we should really jump on the opportunity to know we've got common values, and we should look at a 21st century trade agreement that doesn't only deal with tariffs or quotas, but actually addresses regulations and standards and testing certifications, because we treat our automobile safety different, for instance, than having seatbelts. But if we could streamline those regulations, we would enhance and facilitate the movement of goods and services a lot quicker. It helps trade. 30% of the world's trade is between the United States and Europe. 50% of the world's GDP every day is between the United States and Europe. So even if you move the needle a little bit on tariffs, et cetera, you're going to have a huge economic benefit. And if we can get this right, we can write the rules for trade for the rest of the world. And we should be writing those rules. It shouldn't be China, who doesn't necessarily respect intellectual property and the rule of law. So we've got a great opportunity here. And I'm on a trade subcommittee that focuses on this as a part of my legislative work. But it is tied to jobs in Minnesota. We've got 750,000 jobs in Minnesota that are tied to trade, and it's really about exporting what we make here. And medical devices are certainly one of those areas. We should export that around the world, where 95% of the world's customers live. So it's a real opportunity both in Europe and with the emerging markets in the Pacific. And so the president, by the way, mentioned his ambition to pass these trade agreements as a part of his State of the Union address. So, Republicans want to work with the president, get this done.
I would think a lot of people, when they think of trade, think of the emerging markets and those opportunities and setting up guidelines for that. But you're not looking there specifically with this. You're looking at something that exists, and obviously it is broke and has been potentially broke for some time. Why has it taken this time, or what has been the holdup to get it to a point where people finally say, let's change it? Yeah,
and you're right, the emerging markets in the Pacific area, that's going to be a huge growth area for some time to come. But the reality is that given our relationship with Europe and common values and the lack of progress in this, having common standards and regulations for a long period of time, really, I think, stresses the urgency to act now. And I think we've known this is the right idea for a while, at least I have. And, several of us in Congress on a bipartisan basis have been urging the president since 2012 to move forward on this. And he's taken up the cause as well. And you need that bipartisan support to get this across the finish line. And again, this is to make sure that other countries around the world, might be India, China, Brazil, and others that don't necessarily follow the same rules that we do. If we set these standards high, if we aim high, they're going to be forced to follow our lead. And that's really important, very, very important.
So setting the template up that others will then model as time goes ahead. In both of these last topics, the trade and also the medical device, you've mentioned business quite a few times, and you've also mentioned jobs. So I just want to make it clear for the viewers. Obviously, this helps business in the area, but that trickles down to myself and others that live in this area. Tell me again the impact of something as big as global trade, of how it can affect someone living in Plymouth or Brooklyn Park.
And the reality is that, and I think most of the folks that live in the western suburbs in Minnesota that I represent, they're globally aware. They're aware that it's a dynamic global economy. But our small business, medium business, and large companies alike are all exporting. And that's probably the one area of why Minnesota has had a lower unemployment rate, while we've been more productive. We're actually exporting, and we're providing our agriculture markets too, by the way. We have an agricultural state that sells abroad. So we should sell American. That's really what this is selling American. And the trade agreements we've done over the last few years in South Korea, for instance, the #1 Costco I was told, in the world now is in South Korea. They want to buy our goods, you know,
Okay.
so we want to send Minnesota cheese and Wisconsin cheese. We should be sending those products to other countries like Korea. And so it really is about getting jobs here, keeping the innovation here, and then selling where the customers are around the world.
Okay, in our final couple minutes, we've talked a few times about the new look out in Washington, D.C. Let's talk a little bit about the new dynamics. What are you seeing up to this point? What has changed from what it's been like in past terms that you've been elected, or even the past few years? Give us an overview of what's happening.
You know, a couple of things. First, I think post-election now, it's really important, and this is sort of my view, is it's really important that we hunker down, we work together, and we cooperate, and we get some stuff done. And I just want to be results-oriented and solution-oriented. And the House is moving forward on a lot of the bills we've talked about bipartisanly, and some charitable tax provisions, some other tax provisions to help simplify the tax code. Also, you mentioned some trade initiatives that are going to be bipartisan, and of course, human trafficking. There will be others that we move forward in the very near future. And the Senate now has got new leadership, so they're voting more, they're doing more things. I think that's great. And you know, you're never going to get 100% of what you want, but it's really important to be a good listener, to listen to all points of view, and then cooperate and try to get some things done. And that means kind of making sure that Washington is functioning again, and we kind of break that gridlock. And the president needs to do the exact same thing and work with Congress, and so we need more of that.
That's going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Related to the president then, if the House and the Senate are working together and getting things done, is that next step happening? What do you see as far as the next few years related to that?
Well, it's absolutely needed, and I was invited down to the White House just a week ago for a bill signing. It was a Veterans Bill initiative for bipartisan support of a very important bill to help those returning troops that come back to the United States, because we've been losing about 22 veterans a day to suicide. And so we want to make sure they're getting services that they may need to reintegrate into the workforce or family life or being back home. And we had a really good bill signing, focusing attention with our veterans. And again, this is a good example of everybody coming together, getting some things done. And that's what I want to continue to work on. And, you know, we're never always going to agree. The president's going to sort of have his ideas. Some in Congress may have their ideas. But in the end, to move the issues forward, you're going to have to come together. And that's what I really want to see happen.
How much do you see that happening from the national level to the state level? Obviously, we have our issues here in the state of Minnesota that we're working on. Do you get pulled into that discussion at times related to state issues that might need federal approval or federal focus, and then have to deal with them yourselves? How does that happen?
Yeah.
Take us behind the scenes a little bit.
Yeah, you know, not so much at the state, but if some of our local legislators, for instance, if they were carrying legislative initiatives, or even the governor who visits Washington periodically, or his commissioners, if there was an issue where they thought a federal agency might be hamstringing or preventing Minnesota from doing something on their own, piloting a program, for instance, in healthcare or education, they will be absolutely reach out. And I'm a big promoter of that. I want to see more opportunities for states to pilot programs. That's how we got welfare reform done, for instance, when the states were kind of embarking on their own unique opportunities, because a one-size-fits-all does not make sense for every state. And so I think we can learn under healthcare, under you know, from charitable perspective, and different areas, welfare is an example, that we can learn from what the states are doing, and then we can implement that at a federal level after we see where the success has been.
Well, we have unloaded a lot of information on the public in this last 20 minutes of time. Tell us a little bit more about your website and some of the things you do to keep people up to date there. There's areas for press releases and other content. So if you didn't get it all here in the last 20 minutes and understand all of these complex topics, where can they look, and what do you provide for people?
So my website is just paulsen.house.gov, but I try to really keep my community engaged with myself. I do what I call the Erik's Correspondence Corner every week, and so I pick 2 questions that I receive by email or phone call or letter, and I answer those in a video conversation each and every week. I do an email newsletter update every couple of weeks. We make sure people, if they want to sign up for teletown hall meetings or Congress on Your Corner events, when I come out, I have like mini town hall meetings in the community. I do that every month or so. We want to make sure we're staying in touch with people. All that information is on the website, as well as if you need help with a federal agency, maybe it's red tape with Social Security or Medicare, we have specific people that actually help work through all that red tape with a government agency. Maybe it's a passport issue. And we also like to employ interns and young people.
Okay.
And so if anyone's interested in that, they can contact us, and we bring them into that process and get young people encouraged to be a part of government or public service down the road, which is really important. And then we're coming up on spring break, and a lot of families come out to Washington and take Capitol tours or go to the White House. All those requests, you should send them through my office, because we'll provide the Capitol tour, and we'll make all the requests into the White House and the different areas that they may want to visit. You make sure you have a good trip. And I love bringing kids on the floor to vote and
Wonderful.
give them that experience as well.
Yeah, great opportunities. And again, some of the items that we just talked about in the past half hour regarding the medical devices or the human trafficking, recent press releases there, that's one thing that people will often say to me is, well, I hear about something happening, but I can't find a press release, or there's nothing in the paper about it. You provide some of that information on your website. So where do these press releases come from? Is this your staff that's generating those,
Yes.
or others that you compile and put together? Tell us about that.
Yep. You know, usually if we take action on a bill that I've done and we have a vote or whatever, we'll do a press release, we'll do an announcement. We post that on my website because we want to communicate to anyone who's interested, or maybe Googling a subject or maybe Googling my name, that they get it on the website and they can actually learn more about the issue. And so that's all on the website. There's video conversations and photos, et cetera, of everything that I'm a part of. And a lot of district activities actually are part of that.
Okay. Very good.
Those publications.
Last minute we have with you, what's coming up next? If you look ahead to your next 6 months, year down the road, are there other issues that you see that maybe aren't in the news or in a press release right now that may be something that we can be watching for?
Well, I think one issue that will be coming in the news within the next few months is that it'll be Congress's time again to write a budget. And the President just submitted a budget recently, and presidents always submit a budget, Congress does budgets, and again, this is where there's going to be some disagreement. But we need to pass a budget, and in my view, we need to pass a budget that actually balances and then looks long-term to actually get spending under control and look at our national debt, because it's become more and more of a problem. And I think of my 4 daughters, I just want to make sure they have the same opportunities and choices that all of us have had, or my parents have had. And in this great country, in this great state. And so the budget will be something that gets brought up in the near future. And it's a blueprint, and it's a set of guidelines that we follow. It doesn't have every specific, because there's some things that everybody doesn't all agree with as a part of your budget. But I do think it's important to have some good goals and parameters saying, hey, we think it should balance. We think we should look at the national debt. It shouldn't continue to climb to 18 trillion, but we should actually get that under control.
Where does that stand or rank as far as difficult projects to work on? Is the budget always at the top or near the top as far as the other items that you're working on?
It rises to the top usually right before Easter, because there's a deadline when you have to pass it. And then there are other issues that just pop up. If you look at what's happening around the world today with Russia and Ukraine, or the ISIS threat that we have, and terrorism, I would look for Congress to have a lot of deliberations and discussion right now for the President's request for authorized use of military force to combat those terrorist threats. And so we're going to go through that process in the next month or so as well.
Good. Congressman Paulsen, thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
time. Appreciate you taking some time to stop in and talk with us here. And again, if you want more information, you can certainly visit the website. Thanks for joining on this special Northwest Community Television presentation.